and welcome. My name is Mary Rose Somarriba with Natural Womanhood. Naturalwomanhood.org is a website where you can find all sorts of articles and resources on fertility health and fertility awareness methods. Today, I'm so pleased to be interviewing Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, author of the pivotal book, The Fifth Vital Sign, and creator of the podcast, Fertility Friday, the most popular podcast on fertility health. Welcome, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to talk with you. Just to start out, the very point of the fifth vital sign is showing how menstrual cycles are a vital sign of women's health. And I recall in the book you shared your personal story of a subclinical thyroid issue that you were able to naturally treat long before you were thinking of having children. Can you expand on how fertility charting is a part of comprehensive women's health regardless of one's family planning goals?
Well, yes, that's a great question. We don't often think of the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, but that's exactly what it is. So for any woman who is watching this, who has charted her cycles before, you'll recognize that your cycles kind of shift and change depending on what's happening in your life. So these changes can be as simple as, if you add some, additional exercise, or if you change your diet, you might see an improvement in your cycle, or you may see if you, add too much exercise, or, don't eat enough food, for example, you might see that your cycle change in a negative way. But we can take this a step further. If you do have an underlying condition, so in my case it's a thyroid issue, or if you do have some sort of hormone dysregulation, then you may see more significant shifts in the cycle. So I guess kind of the one thing that we're really not taught about our cycles is that for women of reproductive age, the menstrual cycle is actually a vital sign. It's continually reflecting what's happening in our bodies and our health. And so for a normal, healthy woman of reproductive age, a healthy menstrual cycle is something that is expected. It's not the exception, but the rule. And if we're seeing something that differs from that strays away from that, if she stops ovulating, stops having her period, if her cycles are really off, not falling into normal parameters, it is one of the first signs that there is and potentially is an underlying health issue that should be looked into. So it turns out the menstrual cycle is important whether or not you actually are actively trying to have babies.
I did find that fascinating how you really delved into and just went through all the different ways in the chapters in this book about how your reproductive and endocrine system are intimately connected, and how any issue that comes up is like a warning sign of a larger health issue. So severe pain, for instance, can you share with our listeners and our viewers how any severe pain a woman may be experiencing, or heavy periods, are something that need attention and that are requiring attention? And what would you say to someone who's been told that severe pain and heavy periods are normal?
Well, because I tend to be a little snarky, what I would probably tell someone who told me that, their practitioner told them it was completely fine, would be, imagine a man in your life, whether it's your father, brother, cousin, friend. And imagine if he had moderate to severe pain in his penis for a couple of days every single month. And, imagine if he went to the doctor, what doctor on earth would tell him, yeah, it's fine to have shooting pain in your penis every now and then. It's completely okay. So I would just first and foremost point out the very obvious way that women's pain historically and continuously continues to be dismissed. So outside of childbirth, you can't really think of any other scenario where pain is considered to be completely fine. Outside of, again, childbirth, pain is considered to be a problem. And there are some professionals that actually call pain a vital sign that we should be paying attention to, which is very interesting. So when we look deeper into the issues, so when I was researching for the book, I decided to research, what is a period? What's happening there? And so a period is a normal inflammatory response. And obviously, periods are natural. It's a part of the menstrual cycle, but kind of what's going on there. So when you have your period, what's literally happening is that the functional layer of your endometrium is shed. And in order for this to happen, there is a certain degree of localized inflammation that has to take place. Your body produces prostaglandins, which are lipids that are responsible for basically to kind of cause smooth muscle contractions to help the tissue to leave. And so it's just part of this normal process. And so it's a normal inflammatory process. And so you can imagine that if there's something that goes awry, if there's something that goes wrong, then it can kind of get out of hand. So it turns out that women who have, moderate to severe pain are producing upwards of, 4 times the amount of prostaglandins compared to women who do not have pain. So for anyone who's ever been told that it's normal or that it's in your head or that it couldn't possibly hurt because it's just a period. It's usually men can say, saying those kinds of things. If you've ever been told that, it's helpful to have this type of data. Like, actually, no, women who experience pain have a much more significant measure of inflammatory markers, specifically prostaglandins in this example, versus women who don't have pain. And furthermore, so I was researching a little bit more, and I actually found uh, there was this really interesting study where they actually measured the pressure of the uterine contractions when women are having menstrual pain compared to labor pain, for example. So women who have pain versus women who don't. So for the record, the women who had severe pain had significantly higher pressure that was measured in this study. I mean, isn't it incredible that they can do that? But nonetheless, but they had significantly higher, more intense pressure compared to women in labor. So, what does this mean? Period pain is very common. Many women do experience it. But what it means is that it's a sign that there's a problem going on. And it can range from, inflammation, and we can look at inflammatory foods, different sources of inflammation. But we could also look into more serious conditions like endometriosis. And a fairly significant percentage of women who experience moderate to severe pain do have, endometriosis. It's not always that, but even just knowing that, we should really be taking pain seriously.
Right, and I remember from the book endometriosis, often women who suffer from that can wait 8 to 12 years on average, depending where they live, for a diagnosis for that very painful condition. And part of the reason may be because they are prescribed hormonal contraceptives that can sort of cover up that condition for some years. Now, it seems like a major theme in your work is to remind women that ovulation is an important part of women's health, whether or not you're ready to have a baby. So, what would you say, or why would you say that it's not quite a meaningless healthcare decision to stop periods with hormonal contraceptives?
Well, I mean, that's a big question, as you know. And I think a good place to start is maybe what we're told about what hormonal contraceptives are doing in our bodies. I think that might be a good place to start. A lot of women go on hormonal contraceptives when their periods are quote irregular, and what they're told is that the hormonal contraceptives are regulating their cycle. Many women are put on hormonal contraceptives when they have period problems. So when they have, whether it's irregular cycles, whether it's pain, whether it's, basically anything, if your bleeding is too heavy, if you're spotting from time to time, anything, you're put on hormonal contraceptives. And what you're told about it is that they regulate the cycle. So women go on the pill and other hormonal contraceptives, and they think that this is actually fixing them. So I think that it's helpful to recognize it's what you said, the pill stops you from having periods. Most of us don't know that. So when you're taking the pill, so, you'll get a bleed if it's the pill or any other kind of monthly formulation. You'll get a bleed every 28 days. And so it seems as though it's the perfect solution because it really does make you like clockwork. What many women don't necessarily know is that when you're on hormonal contraceptives, it suppresses ovulation. The vast majority of contraceptive options, it does either fully, completely, or partially suppress ovulation. And so when you're taking it, you literally are not actually ovulating. And what you're experiencing as the bleed is not actually a period. It's called a withdrawal bleed. So in order to experience a true menstrual period, you do have to ovulate. And the reason that that's important is because ovulation is how we make our hormones. So as we approach ovulation, we're producing estrogen, and that helps to build up our uterine lining, and it does a lot of other things. It helps us to produce cervical fluid and all kinds of things that we can track and chart when we're charting with fertility awareness. And after ovulation, we're producing progesterone, and that helps to mature the uterine lining and prepare, the uterine lining for pregnancy. And so one of the reasons why hormonal contraceptives work so well is because they stop you from ovulating. And if there's no egg, you can't have a baby. So, I mean, that's great when you're trying to avoid pregnancy. It also suppresses your normal hormone production. So you're not actually making a mature, full, thick uterine lining that's capable of supporting life. So again, when you're trying to prevent pregnancy, it's great because there's no egg, you can't get pregnant. There's no the uterine lining can't support life. So I mean, it's very effective in that way. But what we don't consider is that it is actually suppressing ovulation. So we're not making our own hormones. So one of the white lies that we're told about hormonal contraception is that it tricks our bodies into thinking that we're pregnant, and that's why we can't get pregnant. If you were to look at the hormone profile of a woman on contraceptives, so the hormones suppress, the artificial hormones suppress ovulation. And so, since ovulation is how we make our hormones, women who are on contraceptives, their natural hormones, so their natural estrogen and progesterone production is very, very low, flatline. So it's more similar to menopause. But of course, it's not good marketing to say that it puts you into an early chemical menopause. But if you think about it that way, then all of a sudden it makes sense. Okay, well, why is it that these 20-year-olds are having vaginal dryness and low libido and all these different issues? Well, it makes more sense when you understand how it really works in the body.
That's fascinating. I love how you just distilled that for us. And I know that it sounds like a broken record sometimes to hear how many women find fertility awareness later in their lives and are surprised they didn't hear about it earlier. Many people haven't even heard of cervical mucus before, finding your podcast. Pregnancy prevention aside, can you tell me what about fertility awareness could best serve teens to be informed at sex ed?
Well, it's kind of funny because I get the question a lot, what is the birth control you recommend for teenagers? Because it's very controversial to talk about fertility awareness as it pertains to teenagers. And so my response is usually, condoms, because condoms also protect us, from STIs. But I grew up in the 90s when we talked about condoms as an effective method of birth control. I was brought up knowing that condoms were up to 98% effective when used correctly, and I knew how to use condoms correctly because we were taught that. So in terms of teenagers, fertility awareness, when I talk about the application for teens, it can be incredibly empowering for teenagers to learn how to chart their cycles and how to understand their cycles. And fertility awareness charting and cycle charting it does not mean that it automatically has to be birth control for a teenager. Because like I said, my top recommendation for contraceptive for teenagers is condoms. So what I usually share when I, get questions about the topic of teens is, just from my perspective, I just have this amazing vision of what this could be like. So imagine for all of you who have teenage daughters, or if there's teens watching, or if you might have a teenage daughter someday. So okay, so imagine that your teenage daughter, you teach her about her cycle. You teach her that ovulation is this incredible function that is how you make your hormones, and you teach her that as you go through your menstrual cycle, your moods and your energy may shift depending on where you are in your cycle. So you may feel a bit more tired, and you may want to kind of hang out by yourself a little bit more when you're on your period. But as you approach ovulation, you might feel like you have more energy and be more creative, and you might feel kind of more outgoing during that time. And you might find that after ovulation, you kind of start to feel a little less outgoing. And just kind of talk about this. You could use the analogy of the seasons of the year, menstruation being winter, before ovulation being spring, ovulation being summer, and then kind of post ovulation being the fall. And so, imagine what that could be like for a teen to kind of really realize how their cycle, not to say we're ruled by our hormones, but how it can affect us and affect our moods, and how we can then, just organize our schoolwork or our exercise routines around it. And then imagine if you told her that you could predict when your period is coming. So you never have to be scared. You never have to be at school, terrified that you might bleed that day, and be in class and have that embarrassing thing. I mean, for a teenage girl, it's like the most possible embarrassing thing. Imagine if you told her that by tracking your cervical fluid, so again, cervical fluid is like creamy white hand lotion or the clear, stretchy cervical fluid. Imagine if you told her that if she paid attention to when she had cervical fluid in her cycle, when it stopped, so when the cervical fluid dried up, that her period would come, 12 to 14 days later. And imagine if you told her, like, you can always predict your period if you track your cycles. So I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, I did not know this information. I remember I started making cervical fluid. Obviously, I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. And I asked my mom, but basically was like, why do I feel wet all the time? And she was like, just wear panty liners. And that was literally the end of that. So imagine what it would have been like. A lot of girls go on the pill because they absolutely do not want to be surprised by their period. So um, I guess the main message that I'm sharing is that beyond whether or not a girl decides to even consider using fertility awareness for birth control, there's a lot of applications of fertility awareness for information. And even if she chooses to go on birth control at some point in the future, she'll always have that knowledge about her body that she gained through learning to chart when she was a teen.
Right. And I think that I just love your vision of that empowering and positive way to describe these natural health processes for women, because with the mystery surrounding them, I know too many people, including myself, who thought that I had yeast infections or problems simply because I had healthy cervical mucus. And just not having that information is such a sort of betrayal, I think, to young women, because it is health class. It's supposed to teach you about your health and your body's functioning. Um, well, speaking of hormonal contraceptives and those who are on those, who do start those at a young age or whatever, I've read a lot of comments from people in, Facebook groups and whatnot, who just, they're on these effective hormonal contraceptives, but they remain very nervous all the time about getting pregnant, even on those contraceptives. And I recall from your book, you sharing how, when you learned about fertility awareness, it really opened your mind. And I love this quote. You said, I was no longer afraid of my fertility. I would ask you, for any woman who's on hormonal contraceptives and still not happy with her confidence in the pregnancy prevention, what would you tell her about how learning a fertility awareness method can make her feel, or has helped you feel less powerless and more assured?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky. I do feel that the younger generation, so I certainly feel like I'm part of the older generation now. I feel that the younger generation have had a lot more indoctrination, for lack of a better word, in terms of fearing pregnancy. So it's a very real thing. The women of the younger generation, pregnancy has basically it's almost like worse than death, right? If you didn't plan it, so they're terrified. They're just completely abject fear is basically what we're going for here. So the first thing I would want them to know is just that what you were taught about the menstrual cycle, unfortunately, is not true. You were taught that you could get pregnant at any day. I think in the book I shared this example where this woman said her doctor told her that, when you're young, you're so fertile, you could get pregnant, sitting on a warm bus seat. And so people really are terrified because it's like they think if their partner looks at them funny, they're going to get pregnant. And so the first step would be to unlearn some of those lies, myths. Lies is a stronger word, which is why I chose it. But the first step would be to unlearn some of that. So, what really started to release me from the fear was to understand how the menstrual cycle worked. And so, from a scientific perspective, there are 6 days of the cycle where pregnancy is possible. And so, this is biology. So, it's kind of going back to biology class, except, of course, they didn't teach you this in biology class. So, there's only a small window of time in the menstrual cycle when pregnancy is possible. Outside of that window, your vagina is naturally acidic and sperm can't survive in an acidic environment. Your cervix, so the opening to the uterus, is actually closed, and you can feel the changes in the position and texture and openness of your cervix if you want to when you're charting your cycle. And so when I started charting my cycles, I jumped right in. I started paying attention to my cervical fluid. I started paying attention to my cervical position, and I started paying attention to my temperature. And it was incredible because what they talked about in the book, I was actually experiencing. So after my period, I would have a few days before I started to see mucus, and then I would start to see, and I use the word cervical mucus and fluid interchangeably, just so that everybody knows that. But so I would see cervical fluid as I approached ovulation, and then I would ovulate. So, and I would confirm ovulation with my temperature. My temperature would rise and stay high, and then my cervical fluid would dry up and go away. And it's been like 20 years, but this is something that happens cyclically. And so it is biology. So you can actually feel, see, and touch and understand how these phases of your cycle work to understand that you're not literally fertile every single day. So the first step would really be to educate yourself on some of the myths about the menstrual cycle. The second step would potentially be to educate yourself on non-hormonal methods so that you actually understand that there are non-hormonal methods and they're out there, and how they work, because we certainly live in a time where it's almost like if you're not on a hormonal method, it's like the message is like it's almost like you're not on anything. Even condoms, they're saying now don't, they're the message is kind of like they don't work. Like if you I'm calling it out, so I'm just fully saying it. But if you go to the Planned Parenthood website and look up condoms, it's not very encouraging. It basically makes it seem like you're not really using a method. So if you are unsatisfied, you're on hormonal contraceptives and you're unsatisfied, you're having side effects, or for whatever reason it's not working for you, but you feel trapped, because this is a real thing these days where women know, some women know that their hormonal contraceptive isn't necessarily right for them. They have certain symptoms. Maybe it's anxiety, depression, maybe they have no libido and they're starting to get fed up, but they really feel like they have no options. So one of the benefits of fertility awareness charting is that the understanding how your cycle works and understanding when you can get pregnant in your cycle and when you can't, if you combine that with non-hormonal methods, like condoms or a diaphragm or withdrawal. I know withdrawal is controversial, but it's everyone's dirty little secret. It's given the work that I do, there's a lot of couples who use it in combination with other methods and things like that. But so I'm just saying what it is. But what I'm saying is that if you combine that understanding of non-hormonal methods with an understanding of when in your cycle you can conceive, if you understand all the different options that you have to manage it, um, you can be successful preventing pregnancy without hormones. And I think that's really the message. The message is not, because a lot of women, the message today is if you go off the pill, it's just a matter of time until you get pregnant accidentally. So the message that I want to share is that it is possible to use non-hormonal methods effectively. It's possible to combine them with fertility awareness. It's possible to use two methods at a time. It's possible to use a diaphragm with a condom and withdrawal too, if you want. Have your partner withdraw with the condom on. But it's possible to pair methods together so that even if you're at you don't want to have children at all, and you're thinking of coming off the pill and you're really scared, I just want you to know it's possible to do this. And if you're thinking about using fertility awareness as your primary birth control, I do recommend you take a class, see an instructor, choose a specific method and learn that, especially if you have concerns about unplanned pregnancy, because the highest efficacy that you're going to get is when you actually know what you're doing and you take the time and effort to make sure that learn how to do this correctly.
Right, and I just want to refer any listeners that to learn how to find a certified instructor in fertility awareness, you can check out naturalwomanhood.org. And I know you also on your site at Fertility Friday will connect people with yourself to find consultation and join them along that journey. What would you tell a woman who thinks that fertility awareness methods, speaking of myths and misinformation, who thinks these methods are like the rhythm method and not effective? And I know you cite 99% and up, and can you explain a little bit about how you've come to find them so effective if you learn from an instructor?
hmm Well, I mean, the rhythm method, it is a method. And essentially what it is, it's based on calendar calculation. So this is what people think of when they think of fertility awareness cycle charting. So basically, if you chart a certain number of cycles and you identify when ovulation is happening on average, then you just avoid sex on those days based on what the calendar says based on a calculation. So that's essentially the rhythm method. So modern day fertility awareness based methods are not the same, because you're not basing your actions on a calendar or a number or a calculation. What you're doing is you're actually tracking your fertile signs each and every day. You're understanding what's happening in your cycle. So the only time in your cycle when pregnancy is possible is in the first half, the pre-ovulatory phase. That's the only part of the cycle where pregnancy can happen. And once you ovulate, pregnancy can't happen. So first of all, educating yourself on that is really important. The second thing that's important with modern fertility awareness based methods is that you track your signs. So you can actually tell when you're fertile or not based on whether or not you see cervical fluid, based on the changes in your cervical position. And so it's literally like every day you're saying, am I fertile or not today based on what I saw? And so it's a very different approach. The most commonly cited study regarding the effectiveness of symptothermal methods. Symptothermal means that you're adding the cervical fluid, the cervical position to the basal body temperature, 99.4%. So in that study, the participants were trained in a specific method from, certified instructors, and they were following the method exactly. And so what it means is that if you identify the days in your cycle which you can get pregnant and you do not have unprotected sex on those days, then you can't get pregnant. The key is to figure out, though, again, there's many different fertility awareness based methods. That's why I keep saying that. And so the key is to really choose one and to follow the rules, to understand the rules, to follow the rules correctly. And it's incredibly freeing. So it goes against everything that we're taught for sure. So it definitely takes some time to get your head around. I work with clients and there's different phases that you have to go through. So the first phase is like kind of like the education phase where you have to dispel a lot of those myths. So for example, you have to kind of unlearn all of the things that make you afraid of getting pregnant. You have to understand the biology. You have to understand how the cycle works and all of that, and how the method works and why it works. And so I mentioned there's 6 days in the cycle where pregnancy is possible, but every method adds a buffer period, after that, and various ways to cross-check and verify that ovulation has taken place. So there's a lot of very specific things you have to understand, all the nitty-gritty details. The second step is charting. So you have to get in there and start paying attention to these signs. It's one thing to understand theoretically what's happening, but it's another thing to actually get in there and start charting. When you start to see cycle after cycle after cycle that your body goes through these patterns and it's repeatable, and you can identify which days are fertile, which days are not. And that gives you a different level of confidence because now you can see it. It's kind of like learning to drive. Like you could read the book, but eventually you have to get in the car. But then there's a third level where once you actually understand the rules, you have charted. And so you understand how to chart and you're confident with that. The third stage is actually to, have unprotected sex during the period of time that is infertile, get your period, right, after a mild freak out, and realize that the method works. And so these 3 stages are what needs to take place before anyone can truly be confident,
Yeah.
And so someone who is on birth control right now and has never even considered using a method, of course, it's completely terrifying, but it's a lot different once you've gone through the process.
Also in your book, you shared how many women who get off the pill will feel more themselves again, these sort of intangibles, reconnected with their intuition. You also shared, I loved your warning label. If there were a transparent hormonal birth control label, it's really eye-opening. And you shared that, studies that show as many as 51% of women experience mood disorders on hormonal contraceptives. Can you, and yet they may be told again that this is normal. Can you comment on how it seems the medical establishment may be downplaying these mental health risks?
Well, we already know that women are considered to be more emotional, and we're all of the stereotypes, so I don't even need to go through them. But in other words, when you as a woman go to a doctor and say that you have anxiety or depression or panic attacks, there's this inherent issue with, well, that's just part of being woman. So there's this inherent barrier, I would say, to proper diagnosis and care, just in general. And I think that we can all recognize those stereotypes. Is there a woman on earth who has not experienced at least once in her life that type of, you know what I mean? Like that type of discrimination, or I don't know if discrimination is the right word, but I think you know what I mean. Kind of being put aside because of your emotions. Like even if you're premenstrual and you are upset about something, certainly many of us have had the experience where our partner saying, oh, you're just on your, moon time or whatever, even though you're legitimately upset about something. Okay. So that aside, it's definitely a challenge for women to, who are on birth control, to have that assessed. And there's a number of reasons why. I would say one of the reasons is because although there is a lot of evidence to show that there is a connection between hormonal birth control and mood changes, literally if you search whatever brand of hormonal contraceptive and you look in the insert and you read it, mood changes are there. Anxiety, depression sometimes are there. Sometimes it's under the label of mood changes, but it's there. So we know that it's there. Even the manufacturer has it listed as one of the potential side effects. And so the warning label in the book, I didn't make that up. Like literally everything was either in a study or on the actual manufacturer's pamphlet, but I used layman's language, layman's words, so that it's very clear what it means. So with that said, what I learned when I interviewed a number of doctors over the years, on the podcast, is that in medical school, it seems as though doctors are taught about the life-threatening side effects and how to potentially mitigate those risks, almost to the exclusion of some of the non-threatening, non-life-threatening risks. So specifically, when I was interviewing doctors, what I was told by, the doctors were that they were taught about the risks of stroke and pulmonary embolism, etc. And they were taught that women over 35 or women who smoked or maybe women who are morbidly obese are at a greater risk. So they're looking for those types of contraindications so that they can refer. And even in cases like that, often they're actually referring, so they're identifying those factors to identify then which other type of hormone would be a lower risk. So it's not even to say that these women can't be on contraceptives. It's more like they can't be on these kind of contraception. Maybe we don't put them on an estrogen containing one, but we can put them on a different one. So when it comes to anxiety and depression and the libido and difficulty to orgasm and painful sex, many practitioners, many doctors don't seem to know or aren't necessarily familiar with those side effects. A scary stat to illustrate this is that teenage girls who are on hormonal contraceptives are much more likely to also be on antidepressants. And, if you and there's research and studies that show this correlation. And if you knew that hormonal contraceptives increase your chance of depression, anxiety, those types of things, then if a 16-year-old comes into your office and she says she's depressed, it would make logical sense to say, well, are you on contraceptives? We know there's a link there. And if she says yes, we could do something like, okay, well, since you're coming to me today because you're concerned about depression, and we know that it could be linked to the contraceptive, maybe we should come off of it for 3 months and see if your depression improves. And if it doesn't, then we can look at, some other prescription or some other type of treatment for that. That's not what happens. So for adult women then who are, facing these types of side effects and symptoms, the hard truth is that it's kind of up to you to educate yourself on some of those most common side effects, because it's not every time you go into your doctor's office that those links are going to be made. And you're maybe more likely to come out with another prescription for an antidepressant than you are for someone to make the link that it could be related to the birth control. And sorry, one more thing I want to say on that. Um, Many women who have these emotional problems regarding, because they're on hormonal contraceptives end up in psychologist's office or, they go to a psychologist, they go to a therapist. And often, again, the therapist doesn't necessarily screen to say, are you on contraceptives? Because we know there's a link. So again, you could be fully getting therapy for a condition of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and you're right. Like you could fully be sitting there having this experience of therapy when literally you just need to switch contraceptives or come off contraceptives, hormonal contraceptives.
And while you did mention that those aren't as life-threatening, I've been shaken by some comments I've read of women just in online Facebook groups saying, I felt like driving off the road today. And so like the suicidal ideation that comes from those mood disorders are no joke. And I could tell, some of these women are realizing this, I don't feel right. Well, another thing that fertility awareness can open women's eyes to, that you've worked on and shared in your work, is how getting pregnant, how many women are concerned about avoiding pregnancy instead of preserving the fertility that may be something they want to take advantage of in the future to have children. For those who do want families in the future, how can fertility awareness now help them to be readier for when the time comes than taking hormonal contraceptives for years? And what do you think about how that could provide greater informed consent to not be surprised later if they have trouble conceiving?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important message because my version of feminism allows you to opt not to have children when you're not ready, but it would also allow you to have children when you do and really emphasize that part of it as well. So not, sacrificing one for the other. Many women aren't aware that when you are taking hormonal contraceptives, there is a transition period that your body goes through when you come off of them. And so it's well known and well documented that during, it can take anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles for before post pill. So if you've taken hormonal contraceptives for 2 years or more, particularly the combined the synthetic estrogen progestin containing contraceptives, as well as the progestin containing IUD, or all of the varieties. But it can take anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles post contraceptives before your cycles fully normalize in all areas. So that includes the length, your period, it includes your cervical fluid, it includes the second part of your cycle, the post-ovulatory or luteal phase. It needs to be long enough, and you need to produce sufficient progesterone in order to maintain a pregnancy. So there's no evidence really to say that, okay, the pill causes fertility problems, but there are two big challenges. One is that, like I said, there's this transition period. So women coming off of contraceptives, again, the research shows that it can take longer for conception to happen. The average healthy person, average healthy couple, on average has about a 25% chance of conception per cycle. So on average, that means it takes about 4 cycles to conceive. So immediately following contraceptive use, that doubles for combined synthetic estrogen progestin containing contraceptives. So on average, it can take 8 months or more to conceive. And so given that we have all grown up in a world that tells us that we can get pregnant on the drop of a dime, and that we will, and that we need to be, and I'm not saying that it's not true for a teenager, don't get me wrong, but we've been taught that pregnancy is a given and we need to be afraid of it, and you will get pregnant at any cost. So you can imagine what would happen, and what does happen, when a woman has been avoiding pregnancy for her, a decade actively, and she comes off contraceptives. And, the first month, she's okay, right? The first month, she, has sex, doesn't get pregnant, she's fine. But by month 2, she's freaking out. So by month 8, she's probably already, signed up for fertility treatments when nobody necessarily told her about this transition period. So that's problem 1. And problem 2 is that because hormonal contraceptives suppress ovulation, so we touched on this earlier, but, hormonal contraceptives are prescribed for all manner of menstrual cycle problems. So if you have irregular cycles, if you have problematic periods, the pill, or other contraceptive is put in there as the solution. What can happen is, because it's suppressing your cycle, you don't know what's going on. So the analogy I use in the fifth vital sign is, it's not really funny actually, but so, if you had a grease fire in your kitchen, and your alarm is going off, and you like pull out the battery, and then you go back and sit down. Well, the grease fire is still going, and you've taken off your alarm. So now it's just going to keep blazing. And so this is the analogy for what's happening. So if you have, and I want to clarify, if you have really horrible, painful periods, I'm not saying that the pill doesn't provide symptom relief, because it absolutely does. But what I'm saying is, there's a difference between symptom relief and solving the problem. So if you have really horrible, hard periods, and you go on the pill for symptom relief, I would suggest that you also, while you're getting that symptom relief, to start to really understand what's happening. See a functional practitioner, start to get under the hood of the car, even while you're on contraceptives, so that at some point when you want children, because the question was like for women who do want children someday. So at some point when you are thinking of starting your family, you have the option to come off and not have these horrible periods still, because eventually you're going to have to come off of it. If you want to have a child, eventually you have to come off of it. If your periods were, 60 days and you never knew when you were having another one, going on the pill isn't going to magically make your real periods 28 days and regular normal. There's a reason why they were 60 days and totally abnormal. So when you go on the pill, again, you have this bleed every 28 days. But if you had a specific cycle problem that you were put on the pill for, you are at a greater risk of coming off the pill with the cycle problem still there. Right? Because the pill didn't actually fix the underlying issue. So that's problem number 2. So for women who are wanting to get pregnant at some point, fertility awareness can be extremely beneficial, because when you're charting your cycles and avoiding pregnancy, but you're still ovulating, you still have a normal cycle, when you're ready to have a child, there is no transition period that your body has to go through. From experience, so I talk a lot about the intention scale. So for example, everyone is on an intention scale. Like, how much do you want a baby today? So from 0 to 10, right? So 0 meaning like, I don't want a baby at all today. And 10 being that you're actively trying to have a baby. So you can go from a 0 to a 10 in one day. Like for example, if you are waiting for, like many couples will have a date, like, okay, in June, we're going to start trying. That might not necessarily be 0 to 10, but in June they're 10. And May, they weren't a 10. Many people want to wait until they get married or something like that. So it's like, I'm getting married in the fall. So you may be 0 right now, but the day after the wedding, you're a 10. And so the challenge with hormonal contraceptives is that you can emotionally switch from a 0 to a 10 in terms of your desire to have a child. But it can take months before your body can transition because you were taking something that was actively physically suppressing your ovulatory function and your normal reproductive capabilities. And so again, there's no research to show that this is permanent, but what I always say is that if you are planning to have a child, so you have this in your mind, you know that you want to have a child in a couple of years, it makes perfect sense to start thinking about your choice of birth control method. It makes sense if you have a time horizon, if you are planning ahead, to consider coming off of hormonal contraceptives. I say 18 months to 2 years before. I know that's a long time. I would say if you specifically were put on the pill for issues, if you had period problems and you were specifically put on the pill, 18 months to 2 years is reasonable, because when you come off the pill, there's the transition. And then if you still had an underlying factor, it may take some time to sort that out. So I'm saying come off the pill before you're ready to have a baby. Find another way to avoid pregnancy so that you can give your body that year to just normalize. If there's any issues, you can see what they are and try to address them. And it's a lot less stressful to be addressing these issues when you are avoiding pregnancy than actively trying to get pregnant at the same time that you're dealing with this transition phase.
Well, thank you for making that so clear for all viewers watching this, because that is so pivotal, I believe. And I love your view of feminism there, to really give women that full information. Well, before we wrap up, can you tell me two things? I'll just say where you see hope for future and growth, since you've been in this industry really, or at least participating in fertility awareness for 20 years and really a pivotal voice in this industry. Can you tell us where you see hope and growth in the fertility awareness education movement, and also where people can find your work?
Well, certainly, I started out and discovered fertility awareness and started charting and teaching in my early 20s. And so it's been like, 20-year journey. And so during that time, there's amazing things that have happened. Right now, periods are kind of in the limelight. There's never been as many women who know about fertility awareness charting and who are, really jazzed about it and who are sharing about it. There's so many different books and resources available now about healthy periods. And this was just not a thing 20 years ago. So in terms of hope, I would say that this is the hope. The reason that I do what I do is because I am not interested in waiting until some, random education system decides this is important, because I think we'd be waiting for the rest of our lives. This is important. And it's something that as women and allies and everyone who is interested in this topic and feels it's important, it's really up to us to spread that message and to just put it out there. So in terms of the hope, I say the hope is in everyone listening who is really excited and jazzed about this, who feels it's important, who then goes on to continue to talk about it basically until just keep blabbing on about it until it just is common knowledge, because really, what else are we going to do?
Thank you. That's fast. That's just, I love it. And where can people find out more? Tell people where they can find your podcast, Fertility Friday, and your book.
Well, thank you for that. So the podcast is Fertility Friday, as you mentioned. You can type Fertility Friday into your favorite podcast player and you'll find it. The book is The Fifth Vital Sign, conveniently located right there behind me. And so it's available on Amazon. You can it's available in the paperback and the ebook and the audiobook format. And I would say it's a great place to start. Everything we talked about is there. It was really important to me to provide the resources and citations, especially because fertility awareness is still not that well known. So there's over 1,000, research citations that I know a lot of women and health professionals alike appreciate that, so that they can kind of follow up on some of these really important details that we haven't been taught. So, and thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Again, yes, check out The Fifth Vital Sign. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this conversation as fascinating as I have. Please share this video so more women can know about their options. I'm Mary Rose Somarriba with Natural Womanhood. For all things fertility health, visit naturalwomanhood.org.